towards the one, the perfection of love, harmony, and beauty, the only being, united with all the illuminated souls who form the embodiment of the Master, the Spirit of guidance. So we just had our check-ins from everyone, and I'll recap the notes that I made about a few of the things that friends spoke about. Making more space for God, more love, being immersed in love, and how to experience that love more fully in everyday life, in contexts and relationships where it doesn't flow immediately and effortlessly. How to speak into each person's listening, to broaden the ways of speaking. Tending the spirit and gleaning knowledge. And then I added, why this path and why this way? I also added a mutu qabla anta mutu, and was going to write something also about annihilation of the false ego, but I didn't get that far. So there are a few themes about how we speak about a path, a spiritual path, and especially a path of the heart and the soul that do not lend themselves to language, to speaking about them. And there are so many beautiful teaching stories, or just ways that great teachers have talked about the fact that we cannot speak about the things of realization, about those deeper, ultimate experiences and awakenings, or the further attained, the further evolved we are in our spiritual life, the less we are able to speak about it. The less people can understand it, the less we can put it into words. And also, often, the less interested we are in putting them into words. It tends to be that people can either be attained or they can be eloquent, but not both. So please let that be a warning to you about my lack of attainment, because I seem to be pretty good with words. So that probably is the biggest neon light sign that I don't know anything. I'm just good at talking about it. So let's see. There are so many spiritual paths, teachings, practices, traditions that are really in service to the unfolding of the soul, the awakening of the spirit, the deepening of the heart, the expanding of the awareness. And the different approaches and the teaching stories, the exercises, the language that are used for them are so widely varied. And Sufism in itself is widely varied. And the form that I believe all of you have been splashing around in, swimming in, seeking out, enjoying, feeling inspired and nourished by in some way, these ones um, are the undercurrent of the Sufi path of love that Murshid called the religion of the heart, and the path of spiritual liberty. So it tends to attract people who are inherently rebellious, that don't want to be told what to do, and that want the path to be beautiful, and want the practices that feel comfortable and enjoyable, and that naturally seduce the ego out of the way and seduce the heart toward opening. So, both of those things. As was mentioned by a couple friends on here, some of us just finished our yearly Murids retreat. That I hold a retreat just for my initiated students, um, and somewhere in that mix, we had a lot of conversations about what the Sufi path is if any of us feel like we chose it, and if so, why we chose it. And I'll tell you, the answers are all so beautiful, and not a single one of them had anything to do with discipline or reining in the ego. Not a single answer had anything to do with discipline or reining in the ego. Reining, R-E-I-N, like the reins on a horse that help pull it back in and manage it and moderate it and control it, right? That kind of reining. Now, I find that particularly striking because in the core Sufi tenets, it is the path of annihilating the false ego in order to allow the real to be seen, to be discovered, to be experienced, to be put at the center of our awareness in our lives. That means reining in the ego. It means discipline. It means managing ourselves and developing mastery. But none of those things have pulled any of us into the Sufi stream of blessing. I'm not saying that sweepingly across the board for everyone on this call or who might find this recording later. There are some people who are drawn to paths because of discipline, because of the instructions and the the system of self-management, but it does not tend to be appealing to the Western mind and the Western ego mentality, which Murshid was very clear about in his descriptions about Sufism and why he shaped the teachings and practices in the way that he did. And early on, he said one of the first things that he learned about the Western mind, the Western student, is that the Western murid will accept no authority. That's a direct quote. Will accept no authority. There is so much self honoring, self cherishing, self care, self prioritizing, self as the highest ideal in the Western mind. And that includes sweepingly across Western Europe and also sweepingly and pervasively across the United States. We actually love the ego. We love we love the aspects and functions of what Murshid would call the false ego. We love it. We love narcissism. We love self-importance. We love self-referencing. We love self-interest and self-indulgence and like put the word self and fill in the blank with something good, and we love it. Me too, y'all. Me too. And we have these glimpses. I'm saying we, like this probably applies to all of us to some extent, or at least like a wide majority of us. We have experiences, even if they're tiny little glimpses, but sometimes they're recurring and vast. We have experiences of feeling and knowing for a moment that all of those aspects of self do not exist, that there is only God, there is only love, that we all have these experiences of natural, spontaneous surrender and the momentary bliss and joy of the freedom that comes with that experience, even if it only lasts for 5 heartbeats or for one breath, or maybe for 5 minutes, or maybe for 20 minutes. For most of us, probably not longer than that. For most of us, probably not longer. For some, it could last for a couple of hours, a couple of days, but that's an extreme version of a hull experience. Hull. I should probably talk more about hull. When we get those glimpses of the real, when we get those glimpses of the emptiness of self, like real undefended, unrefuted. That in itself is the most powerful pull to inspire and motivate us to actually put our feet consciously on the path, or either literally or figuratively to put our butt on the cushion, and to start seeking out and applying ourselves to that unfolding that we can develop into a greater, more consistent, more accessible, expanded worldview and a wider, consistent, available opening of the heart in everyday life. In my experience and awareness, both, it's those things that encourage us toward more discipline. And they also encourage us toward more consistent, proactive pursuit of bliss in whatever ways we can find it and enjoy it. Okay, I'm going to say a little bit about Hull because it occurred to me while I was speaking, and because it's another really core, beautiful set of ideas in Sufism. So there are these two words that we toss around kind of casually in Sufism, and I will put them in the chat window for you. The first one is Hal, Hal, and the second is Maqam, Maqam, Maqam. So these are both experiences in our awareness, in our beings, in our energy. And Hal is a momentary experience, and Maqam is a sustained experience. So they're referred to often as the state or the station, and the state is Hal. That is, and it's usually referring to a peak experience, to a high experience, a joyful, blissful, elevated, exalted experience. And Hal is a moment of bliss, of pure happiness, of ecstatic illumination, or sometimes it's just referred to as ecstasy. And those things, those momentary, short-term peak experiences are useful and beautiful and desirable, and we in Sufism enjoy them, and we don't push them away, but they don't last, and so there's a little trickiness because we get very attached to them, and we are also instructed, invited, encouraged not to be attached to them. So, because they don't last, but they do inspire us. They do plant little seeds of sparkling light, of a gem of inspiration, and of a desirable goal that we go, oh, I can experience so much happiness, so I want it all the time, so I'm going to apply myself to have that as much as possible. And that is woven into the Sufi path. That's not a judgment or a condemnation. It's not something to avoid. It's something to experience and also to keep in its place with wisdom, so that we can pursue the activities, the disciplines, the experiences in our life that can invite more and more of those, because they inspire us upward and onward. They inspire us upward and onward. Then Maqam is the station, that is your constant, ongoing, wider, general. I'm confused about this language, but I'm going to call it modus operandi because that's how we generally use it. That is our usual overall mode of being. our usual overall attitude in life, experience of life, that is um, the, the ground. Now, the ground also changes, but it changes very slowly and very incrementally, so slowly and so incrementally that we do not notice it in any short term way. That the maqam we change over years. That if you take a baseline, a general overview assessment of how are you in life, what is your general attitude? What is the quality of your thoughts? What's the condition of your heart? How loving are you? How happy are you? How balanced are you? How stable, healthy, and mature are you? What is your wisdom condition in this moment overall in life? And you can get a sense of that. That you could do a personal survey of your own life and all of these things and get a general sense of your condition. And then you can go, is it the same tomorrow? Not exactly, but the general mode is the same. Now, if you look at it a year later, might it be different? Might you have a higher or lower assessment of your general happiness, of your general skillfulness, health, equanimity, your sense of balance and compassion, your ground of wisdom? With 1 year different, you might be able to get a sense of it being different, but you also might not. 5 years different, then you can probably get a sense. 5 years, and I'm just making up a number, but you can get the idea of it, right? If you do an assessment every 5 years, you might see a difference. We want, in Sufism, for that condition from 1 year to the next to be better. You can have little peak experiences all along the way, but we want the overall big trajectory to be improving, to be more wise, to be more compassionate, to be more loving, more present, keener, more honest, more clear awareness of self, inner and outer world. And that only happens over a long period of time. So we want to utilize the Hull experiences to inspire us to generally lift the maqam. Both and. That's probably a pretty good synopsis of Sufism. I'm going to pause the recording and come back to you for your comments and questions. Okay, with lots of brilliant insights and questions and different language and different backgrounds of spiritual practice and approaches that uh, friends on this call have in their own experience and their own awareness and the toolbox and the pockets and the in your hands, and all of them are good, that. So I want to start with that. Every single thing that everyone said and everything that you could ever say, if it works for you, it's perfect and it's right and good and useful, and keep it. And please don't take anything that I say as argument or minimization or dismissal of any of the things that have been said. This is why there are so many spiritual paths. It's why there are so many approaches, and not just religions, but excuse me, but also the different ways that teachers will present exercises and work with students. And we're each drawn to the path that is right for us, that our hearts, our consciousness, our ego, our minds, our bodies are drawn to and are willing to accept. That's how it works. So good job, keep it up. And Murshid used the word annihilation for the ego, and then he also talked about how people don't like that word, that we want something softer, we want something nicer, we want something more, I don't know, euphemistic, or we want something lovely. We want the romance of it. And so there are lots of ways that we use language or approach things in a way that helps us feel more romantic about it. And that's also fine. That's also not a judgment. It's just how we work. That our hearts want to be enticed along with beauty. And what was that beautiful saying? Oh, it's one of Mershid's aphorisms that is one of my very favorites. That is, all surrender to beauty willingly and to power unwillingly. Everyone surrenders to beauty willingly and to power unwillingly. So, the Sufi path is like a I'm just seeing it as like a rigmarole of like a path of lots of tasks and chores and like exercise equipment workout machines, but it's lined with roses. It's just lined with beauty that will just like keep pulling us along going, get to work and here's another rose, and get to work and here's another rose, and here's get to work and here's a piece of chocolate, now get to work, and here's some coffee, and get to work and here's some red wine, and here's like so that's pretty good. Okay, so I'm not attached to you using the word annihilation. And I think it's important to remember that the way that we, like in this moment, in the year 2025, in Canada and the US, the way that we are thinking about the word ego is so strongly informed by our access to and information base around more modern psychology. And some of those things are probably close to what Murshid meant by ego, and some of them are not. So we need to, like, we don't need to do anything, but we can look at things from different facets, and understanding the language that is woven into the traditions of Sufism can be helpful in stepping us back from our assumptions and our judgments and our condemnations and our celebrations of our modern day use of the word ego. So, one of the things that I think is super important is the way that Murshid shaped this into the Sufi thought, which is annihilation of the false ego in the real. Sometimes he talks about the distinction between the false ego and the real ego. That is just an expansion of the same thing. Annihilation of the false ego in the real ego. Now, I think that y'all are correct that we don't get rid of the ego. And the idea is not to get rid of the ego. The idea is to drop away and to pierce through and to clear out the falseness so that we can experience and navigate life and understand ourselves and commune with, connect with, contemplate, and realize God in purity, in truth, beyond the distortions, the distractions, the confusions, and the earthly limitation-based concepts and experiences of the false ego. I put it in quotes on purpose. Now, in Sufism, we talk a lot about the word nafs that some of you even mentioned. It's spelled Nafs, and that's a singular word, nafs. It just happens to have an S on it, so then we think that it's a plural thing. It's not, nafs. So the nafs is within each of us. Oh gosh, I just opened a can of worms. Okay, it is within each of us as, here are a few of the many, many definitions of the nafs. Simplistically, in our modern day language, we would say the nafs is the ego. Fine, that's true. The nafs is the ego. The nafs also is said to be the garment, the garb, the disguise that the self wears while we are wandering around in this world, in this incarnate existence, in our human form, in our individuated experience and identity. Nafs. It is sometimes said to be the identity. It is what you truly are, and also what you believe yourself to be, what you perceive and experience yourself to be. It is also said to be the breath itself. Nafs is breath. What? Now we're all confused. How is that breath? Well, it is something that is tied to worldly life that is bringing in the life force and sending out life force that is the magic livingness of our physical breath and also the spirit breath. Nafs is also said to be the ties, the strings, the knots, the cords, the anchors that have us connected to and relating to the things of the world. That is, it's like the tethers that I'm imagining this, like we, each of us individually, is like a hot air balloon, and the nafs is like the ropes that keep us grounded until we are ready to cut them and go floating off into the ethers of God. So it's said to be the ties or the knots. Sometimes the nafs is said to be the knots, like the actual like knotted cords. That is the qualities of our thoughts, our feelings, our associations, our connections, our desires, our preferences and aversions. All of those things are tied to the definition of the nafs. Now, in Sufism, are you tired of this yet? Are you excited? Are you having a good time? Also, in Sufism, there are lots of different levels of the nafs, and I'm not going to remember all of them, so I'm not going to go through all of them, but you can think about them as the planes of consciousness or the associations that we can identify with from the most dense, from the most coarse, the least refined, the most heavy, the most tangible, into the most intellect based, idea based, concept based, into the most etheric, transcendent, angelic based, into the ultimate reality of God based. So I shouldn't even call it based at that point. It's just okay. So you can go through if you do a Google search for levels of the nafs. I encourage you to look for the 3 levels of the nafs, the 4 levels, the 5, the 6, the 7, the 8, the 9 levels of the nafs, because you can find systems that have different numbers of how many levels of the nafs are there. And you can go, it doesn't really matter. There is a process, a spectrum of the nafs, and you can put a point, a marker, a cairn at any point on that spectrum and go, well, that's this level. Well, that's this level. But then you can slide it up or down on the spectrum. Go, well, sometimes it tips over here. And so, but essentially, it goes from what is the quality of being that is identified with, that believes that it is, that relates to itself and the world according to the most base, primitive, tangible, visceral, earth, worldly, limitation based perspective and capacity. And then, what is the absolute most transcendent, most etheric, most capital T true? And all of that is the nafs. Every single bit of it. Every stage, every phase, every level, every moment of consciousness, and every moment of association, identification, it's all the nafs. All of it. We want to move from the most dense to the most high, to the most vast, the most spacious, the most pure. You can legit say, instead of annihilating the nafs, you're purifying the nafs. That works too. And that is the ego. In the Sufi concept of the ego, you could say all of that are the levels of the ego, the planes of consciousness that are tied to our associations and functions of the ego. We can go from the most dense are the ones that absolutely believe that we are our physical world and that our highest values are based on how 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 much physical beauty we have, how much wealth we have accumulated, how much power we have in governance of this worldly life. what car we drive, what house we live on, what relationships we have, what values we have tied to that level of the nafs. And those things are pretty obvious. And we all naturally have evolving ideals. That is, what are the things that are the most important to us and that we put at the center of guiding our lives? That is our personal North Star, our personal highest value system that we put in charge of shaping our lives, our self-mastery, and and this process of the unfoldment of the soul. And those ideals, as you know, and as we've talked about, several of us have talked about on here today, those things change over time, which is why one of Murshid's beautiful aphorisms is shatter your ideals on the rock of truth. Shatter your ideals on the rock of truth. And that doesn't mean that we figure out what our ideals are and we strive to destroy them. No, it's that we strive to attain them because they will be replaced by higher ideals. He also referred to our ideals as stair steps. And the point of stair steps is not so you can stand on one of them and feel proud of yourself. The point of stair steps is that you step onto one and then you step onto the next one and you step onto the next and the next and the next. That we want to be constantly moving and evolving, changing, aspiring, accomplishing, and moving on to something bigger, better, more clear, more true, more real. How to know that we're not replacing one false ego with another? You can't. That's my simple answer. You can't. Mostly because we are all wandering around in the world, in ourselves, inner and outer, through our own lenses. And the lenses are shaped by the ego. And we're perceiving the ego through the lens of the ego. So, really, honestly, sincerely, we cannot. None of us are capable of real, clear, true objectivity. And we are not capable of seeing ourselves objectively. That we try, we aspire. And that's part of the Sufi path, is really the sincere aspiration toward as much clean objectivity as we can manage. And also acknowledging, knowing, recognizing that it's tremendously limited. Which is why the Sufi path is so inextricably tied to the relationship with a teacher. It's not that we can't progress without a teacher, we can. But our progress is going to be shaped by all kinds of other things. Now I'm going to argue with myself and say, every one of us has a teacher, whether it's a human being or it's the ego. And the teacher that we have chosen reflects our defenses, our insecurities, our desires, our ego motives. And for some of us, like I have chosen a human, living, breathing teacher because that feels tremendously important to me for my own sense of integrity, for my own sense of accountability, that I feel like for me it is infinitely important for me to have a living, breathing, intelligent human teacher that I can talk to, that I can talk about my shortcomings, my questions, my doubts, my interests, my inspirations, my struggles and celebrations, and that I can get teachings from, that I can get different perspectives on, things that are not generated from my own interests and ego motives. And so for me, that's tremendously important. And I have, I'm not sure if I've taken that leaf from Murshid Sam's book or if I just celebrate Murshid Sam's leaf in his book because it matches my own understanding and value system. But Murshid Sam, who I have him. He's hiding behind my chair right now, but there he is. That Murshid Sam I believe, was a tremendously realized being, a tremendously illuminated, realized being. And he absolutely insisted on having a personal teacher throughout his entire life. And it did not matter what level of attainment or realization or clear insight or clarity of purpose or whatever awareness he had, he knew that it was necessary to have a living human being as an ego check at every step in every moment. If you don't have a living teacher and instead your teacher is books and podcasts and scriptures and whatever, then those are the beings and the teachers that you have chosen. And all of those things are chosen because of the things that appeal to your ego. All of those things are chosen because they appeal to our egos. Our human teachers are also the ones that appeal to our egos. So I think that this is me. I think that it's important to do our due diligence, our honest discernment to try to understand what our motives are. What is it that appeals to us and why? And not because we can avoid it, but because we can include it conscientiously in the light, in our active intentional awareness. I think that's a benefit. I think that's a good thing. Okay, so then being the witness is a good idea. Polishing the heart, polishing the lens, the awareness is good. I keep looking down at my notebook that's in my lap right now. That's what I'm doing. I'm not praying, I'm reading. Well, what's the difference? Okay, now fana. So another excellent, very rich Sufi term that we're going to spend forever on. No, I want to be brief about this because there was something else I wanted to get to that now I've forgotten anyway. So fana, I'll put this one in the chat window also. People pronounce it different ways. I say fana. Some people say fana or fana or something, and however you say it is fine. And fana is very similar to annihilation. I think of it more as surrender and disappearance. Surrender and disappearance. And it is typically done fanafi. But fi means in or within or into. And so fanafi, and in Sufism, you'll hear fanafi. First thing that you'll hear first generally is fanafi sheikh. And fanafi sheikh means surrendering oneself, disappearing oneself into the teacher. And this is generally, not always, but generally understood to be the living human teacher that is putting oneself under the guidance of the teacher and shaping one's life, one's practice, one's awareness in the mode, in the atmosphere of the teacher that one has chosen. Vilayat teachers. Trying to remind myself for later. Okay, so that's the first thing that is the first level of fana that is talked about frequently in Sufism. The next one, sometimes, not always, but is called fanafi pir. That is dissolving, disappearing oneself into the spiritual leader of it. It can be the spiritual leader of an order, or it's the smallest, most immediate form of a messenger, of a prophet, or it's not a big kind of a prophet. It's like the teacher who is carrying a particular responsibility that is not necessarily one's personal teacher. But for this, you could think easily about Pir Murshid Inayat Khan, where you can go like, he's the pir. He was carrying a message of Sufism and a system of teaching and training that was bigger than the personal association guidance. So Fanafi Pir is surrendering, dissolving, disappearing oneself into a higher ideal of teacher. Next is Fanafi Rasul. Now, Rasul is probably the most common word that we hear that means a prophet or a messenger. That is the big form of someone who is bringing the light and the truth and the guidance and the instruction and revelation of God to all of humanity that is relevant for all people at all times in all places. And these ones are very, very rare, but a Fanafi Rasul means that we are disappearing ourselves, not necessarily, and actually not at all, in the prophet, in the personhood of the prophet, but in the message, in the instruction, in the wisdom, in the truth of God as it can be received, realized, and worked with by humanity. Finally, there is Fanafi Allah. That is dissolving, disappearing oneself, surrendering entirely into God. So those work progressively. I should go this way. They work progressively from the most immediate, from the most tangible, the most personal, into the most transcendent and the most ultimately real. And these are not things that we can um, that we can force. They're things that we can invite. That I love. Um, One of the quotes that my teacher Ramat, who I love, says is that awakening happens by accident, but practice makes us accident prone. Right? So we can do all of the things because it helps us be receptive and ready and willing to dive into the experience or allow the experience when it does arise. Okay. I'm going to pause the recording again. There are a lot of spiritual paths that try to work with the ego, the sense of self, through punishment, through condemnation and berating and um, enforcing judgment and wrongness, sinfulness. And there are some paths that try to work with the ego, with the self associations through love, through kindness, through acceptance, through understanding, through a loving light. In Sufism, there are both. And it really depends on the teacher. And the teacher depends on the student. We all need a different approach. We all need, like each and every one of us, has our own unique path that includes our history, our natural interests, our conditioning, our wounding, our fearfulness, our enthusiasms and passions, that includes our, like the yogic paths where there are four distinct paths that are devotional and service and meditative and knowledge based. And so same, like, except that there are not just four paths, there are infinite, there are as many paths as there are individuals. Now, some of us show up on a path saying, give me discipline. I know, not at my Marie's retreat, but there are other people in other places that show up going, give me discipline. Sometimes the request and desire for discipline is based on an authentic self-knowing, is based on a true objective witnessing of self going, I really sincerely, authentically need some discipline. I need some strict guidelines. I need some strict instruction. I need a very specific set of rules and expectations and consequences. Some of us actually thrive with that. Other people show up saying, give me discipline, because we feel so terrible about ourselves and we believe that we deserve to be punished because we believe that there is something inherently wrong with us that needs to be criticized, condemned, and corrected. And those things are also based on ego, but not a prideful ego, a shameful ego. Shameful ego, make no mistake, is still ego. There's some of us who show up on the path saying, be nice to me and love me. And the be nice to me and love me comes from an authentic, clear self-awareness, an objective, purified witnessing of self that really knows that we need to be loved and accepted, encouraged, and treated gently and kindly. There are others who will show up on the path that will say, be nice and kind to me. And it will come from a place of egocentric indulgences, of not wanting to learn, not wanting to grow, and wanting to pamper and accommodate ego motives and preferences that are also based on wounding, on a desire to actually amplify and placate the rampant ego nature. Those are four kind of placeholders that map out a general terrain. There's a lot of variation in there. And ideally, a Murid finds enough self-awareness and enough self-motivation. A Murid is a student, that is someone who is actively choosing to participate and engage in the Sufi path as an initiated Murid with a guide in a particular tradition. So that's what a Murid is. Ideally, a Murid shows up on the path with some little bit of self-awareness and will seek out a teacher that they feel they can work with, that they feel they can respect, they can trust, and that they can have confidence in and accept guidance from. And ideally, the teacher can hear the Murid's self-report and not believe it at all, and will look for what the Murid actually needs that is beyond the motivations of ego-focused protections, preferences, and aversions. And there's some combination of that that needs to be at work for any effective path. There's a combination that has to be at work for any effective path. Now, there's one of you in particular, I'm not going to say the name because this is going to be a recording, but one of you in particular who mentioned being on the path of ego annihilation for a long time. So you know who you are. Please stop it. The path that is necessary and important for you is not one of your proactive, intentional, knowledgeable, volitional ego annihilation. The path that is appropriate for you, my friend, dear, sweet, beautiful, perfect friend, is one of resting in your perfection and of deepening and strengthening the awareness of your own true, beautiful, divine essence. And there is no punishment needed, and there is no correction needed, and there never has been. Now, y'all that are on this meeting, I'm speaking as a teacher to a particular student with a particular path. Any teacher, any decent teacher who has multiple students will speak differently to every student, because every student is doing their own personal, unique soul unfoldment. And there are no two that are alike. Some need correction, some need kindness, some need encouragement, some need limits. Pausing the recording again. So the question is something like, here's my paraphrase for it. Can a teacher really see a student clearly? And that includes whether I'm going to say that includes whether it is in person or online or whatever. And I'm going to say it depends on the teacher. It depends on the teacher. And I do believe that there are teachers, or at least have been teachers, that can absolutely just pierce through all the veils of illusion and the levels of NAFs and the personality presentations and all of the things. I do believe there at least have been teachers that can absolutely see perfectly clearly. And I am not one of them. And I do not believe I have ever encountered one of them. Then I had, I still have a friend, though she's not alive anymore, who was a Sufi teacher, and she talked about the difference between a small T teacher and a big T teacher. And everyone I know as a teacher is a small T teacher, including myself. And small T teachers can still be effective, but not because we have some spectacular, clean psychic insight. We can be effective and skillful because we are authentically loving, because we are sincere in our humility and our attunement to lineage, to the teachers that have gone before us, because we have dedicated ourselves to understanding ourselves and the path, and what was the phrase for it, y'all? Gleaning knowledge, and because we are navigating our own soul's unfoldment in authentic, sincere, beautiful, loving ways. And I think it is important for students to understand what kind of teacher you're choosing and why. And in the way that, well, there are lots of different ways that the role of the teacher have been described. And in none of them is it about a teacher giving knowledge to a student or giving an experience to a student. The teacher is helping the student to uncover the knowledge and the wisdom and the reality of their own divine nature. And that's all. Murshid said that the teacher functions like Cupid, that is helping draw the lover and the beloved closer together. That is, drawing the student and God closer together.